I mentioned at the top of the show that the Uluru Statement of the Heart has won the Sydney Peace Prize this year. It's been accepted by those three Indigenous leaders I mentioned earlier. Noel Pearson, the Cape York Indigenous leader, joins us now live from the Sydney Town Hall. Thanks for joining us, Noel, and congratulations on this. I explained at the top, this award really goes to everybody involved right across a whole range of Indigenous communities and organisations that got behind the Statement of the Heart.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chris. And this is a recognition of the statement and all of the people that contributed to it in 2017. Many hundreds and hundreds, many thousands of people have subsequently endorsed the statement as well, and the Peace Prize recognises that achievement.
Now, I mentioned also that I've disagreed with the Peace Prize many times in the past. Sometimes it's gone to people, I think, who are divisive and who are looking to stir up trouble or attract attention. That's what's really pleasing about this. Even if people disagree with some of what the Statement from the Heart calls for, this is a process that's been going on for years. It's involved people compromising. It's involved people actually putting their egos aside to come to an Indigenous consensus in this country, a platform from which people can try and build reconciliation. Has that surprised you? Because you've been involved in political spats in this space for decades, Noel. Were you surprised you were able to build this consensus?
Yeah, it's been a hard, long 10 years since 2011, but the real process kicked off in 2007, and that's when then Prime Minister John Howard committed on the eve of the 2007 election that within 18 months, if he was re-elected, he would take a proposal to the Australian people to recognise Indigenous Australians in a preamble to the Constitution. That was his concept in that speech to the Sydney Institute. It really was kicked off by John Howard. The whole cause of recognition was kicked off by John Howard at that Sydney Institute speech in 2007, and I was very pleased to play a role in those discussions with the then Prime Minister. I'm very pleased that we've made progress over the past 12 years. Particularly since the expert panel that I was a member of in 2011. It's been a long road, but it's a road that's been building consensus all the way. We've had 3 parliamentary committees, and we've had 3 public consultation processes over that period. And this latest round that you and I are a part of, Chris, I think is going to produce a design for legislation that would give expression to the call for a voice. But the crucial question for me now is to get the constitutional component of the voice clearly defined, and that we hang any new legislation off that hook.
Now, let's go to that then.
Put a new hook in the Constitution.
Indeed. Now, you make a very important point there, that the push, the impetus for Indigenous recognition in the Constitution came from John Howard and from Conservatives. Also, there have been Conservative voices very strongly in alignment with you when it comes to this Indigenous voice to the Constitution. You and I, as you say, by way of declaration, are both involved in a senior advisory group to the government on putting the voice together, the architecture of the voice. But you're saying now that the government shouldn't do what their current policy is and just put that to the Parliament legislative voice. They should design it so people can see exactly what it would look like, but then it should be put to the people as a constitutional referendum on Indigenous recognition in the Constitution. How long will that take, and will the federal election get in the way?
Well, I think that we could have a referendum within a set period of time following the next election. it would be, John Howard in 2007 said within 18 months, that's what he said in his speech, within 18 months of the election, I will put a referendum to the Australian people. Now, a similar thing could be done here. My argument as to why the legislation should wait for the referendum is that otherwise we would hang the legislation off the old race hook. That's section 5126. That's a race power. And I think it'd be symbolically terrible if we hung the voice on a race power, because the whole point of a voice is not to create a separate racial institution. This institution is not on the basis of race, it's on the basis of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people being indigenous to the country. That's what the recognition is, that we're all part of a one Australia, we're all Australians, we have a common citizenship as Australians. It's just that we are finally recognising that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples have a special connection to Australia that predates European colonisation, and that's what the whole case for recognition was laid out by Prime Minister John Howard in his 2007 speech. I agree with every word he said in that speech. The mechanism for recognition that he proposed was a preamble. I think the public discussion over the last dozen years has now narrowed down to the enactment of a voice. And I believe that a new hook, a new enabling power needs to be put into the Constitution, and the new legislation should hang off that new hook. It would be a terribly redundant exercise, Chris, if we hung the new voice on the old hook of race. In many ways, I'm on a unity ticket with say, the IPA and Andrew Bolt, who reject the concept of race being reinforced in our Constitution. I agree with them. We should no longer talk about Indigenous people as a separate race. We're all one part of a human race. It's just that the recognition of the special history of Indigenous Australians is what this whole issue is about.
Yeah, and that special link...
And I believe the great...
Sorry to interrupt, I was going to say...
So special link with...
It's recognised already through Mabo, right?
Correct. And what was Mabo? Mabo was the common law of England. So the common law, if we hadn't had the English common law come with the colonists in 1788, we would have no Mabo. Mabo is actually a privilege of English law. And it was the English law that recognised the pre-existing rights of the native people. So we've had this enormous privilege of having a High Court decision in Mabo. We honoured it with the Native Title Act under Prime Minister Keating, and then Prime Minister John Howard said, well, the completion of this recognition is constitutional recognition, but we've got to do the recognition in a way that actually reinforces the idea that we are all Australians under the Constitution. We're one citizenship, and giving the voice to Indigenous people is just a recognition of that special history.
Noel, so great to hear you express all that so succinctly and powerfully. I wanted to talk to you about education, but we don't have time. I've got to get you back on soon to talk about education. Okay. It's an issue that's very dear to my heart, and I'd love to come back on to talk about schools, because that ultimately that will underpin our future as a people, the education of our young children. Thanks so much for joining us, Noel Pearson.
Thank you.
Noel Pearson there. I went to a speech last week he gave on education for Indigenous kids and all kids in this country. His ideas are compelling, and we'll have him back on the show soon so we can all hear about those.